I have three words for you: spark, shift, and succeed. Good morning and welcome to another inspiring edition brought to you by Unique Speaker Bureau International. I am Melissa Tsodete, and it is an honor to host you for a session that I know will stay with you long after today. We often celebrate high performance for its output, the results, the wins, and the milestones. But rarely do we ever speak about the emotional cost, the psychological weight, and the silent battles that individuals carry behind the scenes. Today, we are joined by someone who not only understands this reality, but has lived it and transformed it. Our speaker, Nick Jonsson, is a globally respected keynote speaker, best-selling author of Executive Loneliness, and a leading voice on well-being in leadership. His journey from extreme burnout and isolation to reconnection, purpose, and global impact has positioned him as a powerful teacher in the space of human-centered performance. For the next 20 minutes, Nick will be taking us through a deeply personal and profoundly relevant message titled From Rock Bottom to Reconnection, the emotional side of high performance. In this session, he'll unpack the real story behind high achievement, the vulnerability, the pressure, the breaking points, and most importantly, the pathways back to wholeness. Nick's philosophy is rooted in truth. Leadership excellence means nothing if it costs you your well-being, your relationships, or your sense of self. Ladies and gentlemen, prepare for a session that is honest, human, and deeply liberating. Please join me in welcoming Nick Jonsson.
Wow, thank you so much, Melissa, for that warm intro. I'm really looking forward to spending the next 20 minutes with you. And first of all, I have the meeting chat open there, so feel free to ask questions and we might take them after, but also any reflections or any comments. I will also try to make this interactive. So let me start here then. Well, while I'm an author today, you will hear as I'm sharing my story, that was not what I thought would happen in my life. I have also a lot of certifications today, and that has been to grow myself, and these days I'm on a journey then to pass it on to others. I'm a coach, a therapist, and a counselor, and I specialize in addictions and suicide preventions. And you will hear from my story that I do this also in the workplace as well as with individuals. I do work around the world. I'm in Phuket, Thailand today, but next week in Singapore, Kuala Lumpur the following week. So I travel around the world to work with teams on helping them with team psychological safety and connection. This was not something that I thought, as I said, would start my life. So let me start to go back a little bit in time. Let me take you back to Sweden in the middle of the 90s. It was cold and dark, and I was at the time working as a construction painter. So I didn't start as someone who worked in white-collared jobs. I was a blue-collar worker, and the painter that are painting the walls like this, yes, so not the artist per se. So I grew up in a working-class family, and the way I learned to earn money was really to work harder, work longer hours, raise your hand to work weekends if you want to earn more money. And hi, Christina from Stockholm. Thank you for checking in. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. So that was my life. And it was only the day when I rode my motorcycle down in a cold spring day in Sweden. I got hit by a car. I had an accident and I injured my neck and my back. And the doctors told me that I can no longer work with my body. While that moment was the first time I was in a big depression, it really hit me because the world as I knew it suddenly disappeared from me. It was also a catapult to change my life forever. Because when the doctors told me that I had to change my job, I was forced to go back to school. And I was 22 years at the time and I could hardly speak English. And at that time I was then thinking, what should I do? Where should I study? And I looked at a map and I wanted to go somewhere where it was warmer. I ended up in Australia. And down in Australia, I remember the dean of the business school giving a talk on the first day about success. The dean was sharing that if you study harder, you can earn scholarships, you can get awards, and you can get trophies. And something in that talk spoke to me. I decided to study hard. And I can remember that about halfway in my studies, I earned that scholarship. And while I was happy for a moment to earn that scholarship, I was soon filled by fear because I also realized that when I read the details of the letter of the scholarship, I had to now study really hard to maintain my grades to keep this scholarship. It made me quite isolated, and I remember studying day and night, and when my friends were out, I was locking myself in, studying hard because I had to keep my grades at that level. So it became suddenly about not losing, or it was not about winning anymore. I believe that that was perhaps when the anxious overachiever was born in me, and I then brought that with me into the workplace. I worked for the last 23 years in Asia, and 10 years out of those was in the corporate world. You could say, elbowed my way up the corporate ladder. I set the eyesight of managing director's position already as a young executive in the big firms, and I was deliberately working hard. I wasn't connected with my emotions during this time. It was more about achieving, performing, pleasing the bosses and so on. There was nothing really there for me. I tried to tick the boxes. Another box to tick was to get a family. The pressure for my parents to get married and have a kid was ticked to please them. Finally, they were happy with me because the previous girlfriends was not who they wanted to have in the family, but I had met someone who they liked, so I jumped into a relationship. Moving on, I ticked more boxes and I got more promotions, and eventually I had reached that managing director position. I had all the perks I ever had dreamt of. So that was about a 10 years journey to the top. And having done that and eventually reached that top, I realized that I wasn't happy. I started to have self-doubt, and in work I started finally making mistakes. Having been a top performer and achiever, suddenly I wasn't delivering as I expected to. At least not in my own words. No one told me that I was not delivering. In fact, I got bonuses and paychecks as if I a top performer, but inside me something was missing. So this self-doubt led me eventually to resign from my job. As I resigned, I came back and I told my ex-wife what I'd done, and she said, "Where did this come from? You were happy in this job. I thought you had everything you ever wanted." And then, as she challenged me, I also wasn't ready to have that conversation with her. So instead of having that conversation, I filed for a divorce. So a 13 years marriage came to a halt because I wasn't able. I didn't have the emotional intelligence at the time to be able to hold those conversations. That led me in a very, very lonely and isolated place. And while I'm holding a smile here on this picture, I call it in my book, Executive Loneliness, as a smiling depression. I was overeating to deal with my emotions, and I was drinking alcohol to numb my feelings and emotions. That was the state I was in at the time, but I was also in a full-blown denial about it. For about 2-3 years, I failed at everything I did. I jumped from job to job. I burnt through all my savings, and I was almost bankrupt. And at that point, about 8 years ago now, this was the state of my foot. It looked like an elephant foot, basically. It was swollen to the point where I couldn't put on a shoe. It was later diagnosed by a psychiatrist as a psychosomatic illness. That's something that happens to the body when you're not expressing yourself. So because I had bottling up all my emotions and all my feelings during this time, and I didn't speak honestly about my resignation at work, I didn't speak or deal with my divorce and also the separation from my son, who moved with my ex-wife to Sweden at the time while I still lived in Asia. There was no way for me to process it, so the body started to express it in its own way, in this sense, with this swollen foot. That was basically when I reached the lowest point of my life. I need to say here that I wasn't suicidal, but I thought that life would end soon because I looked at my body as it was breaking down. I did at that time write my testament. I signed up for life insurance, and I basically was ready to throw in the towel. But at that lowest point, at my rock bottom, something suddenly happened. Something snapped that changed me. And I will share with you today what that was. What was that turning point that saved my life and got me out of that depression? Today, my life is happy again and I'm fully healthy. I'm remarried and I have a relationship where I speak about my feelings and emotions. We have open conversations about challenges in life as well as the good parts in life. I'm also back in the best physical shape of my life. And this is me competing in an Ironman event where we swim 3.8 kilometer, we cycle 180 kilometer, and then we run a marathon at the end. I have a couple of my medals here, including one from the World Championship, and I'm looking forward to come to South Africa to race one day. I know you have some beautiful Ironman events there too. So in this sport, I compete in the 50 plus age group now, and I'm top 2% in the world. Basically, connected with my physical and emotional state and competing at that highest level. I'm also doing what I love to do. I'm traveling around the world, speaking, arranging workshops, and I'm also coaching and doing therapy with high performing executives to make them better connected with their feelings and emotions. The things that I failed during my corporate life, I can now pass on and help others do. So my vulnerability is these days a strength for myself and others. So what I created then, and what I'm going to spend the last few minutes with you to talk through, is how did I come out? What was the turning point? And what was the steps that I took to come back to the person I am standing in front of you today? Let me present the 5 steps to holistic leadership, which is the latest book I'm writing for the last 1 year that I hope to be on the shelves by end of this year. It's really a roadmap to connect with the emotional side of high performance. And let me then share first, what was the first step? What was it that I did when I was lying there in my bed, looking at my swollen foot at that moment when I thought that life was over? Well, there was one thing that happened. I decided at that time to ask Donna, who was the woman I showed you on the picture, who is today my wife, to sit down on the sofa as I shared with her how I felt. I call that step the surrender step. I had to surrender my old way of thinking and keeping everything inside me to protect my image. I had to let go. So once I asked her to sit down and start to share how I felt internally, I could name my emotions and feelings. Things from me just started to be released from me. And it's almost like I was coming back to life instantly. So that was the first step that I did. And she then listened with empathy, and she did what many human beings would do. She took me to a doctor after that, and she shared to the doctor about what I've shared with her. So then I was exposed the second time in the same day. And then after that, we went home to a friend of ours, someone who'd gone through some challenges emotionally before, and this person listened also with empathy. So here I am, exposed 3 times to my story about everything I spent 3 years to protect in basically 1 day. With that, I had that V-shaped recovery. I was coming back to life. So then it was about building a new life based more on purpose. So I had to really go back and into my childhood and think back through, who is Nick Jonsson? Who is he without the scholarship, without these high achieving awards, and really recraft my purpose and legacy. So that was the second step that I went through, and really align my life to make it more meaningful, and also putting boundaries around myself and not doing the activities that doesn't generate the happiness that I need in my life. Then it was about the third step, and the third step in my journey is about connection. So I was very isolated before. I grew up in Sweden in a social distant, introverted family where we didn't speak about emotions. And as I shared, my family said that, well, grind through it, push through it, be a man, or boys don't cry. That was sort of the hard mentality that I soldier through with. And it took me so far. It took me all the way to the top, but it made me fall all the way down as well. So now it was about authentic connection. So take off my mask and become my true self, and to be someone who can look after themselves and look after others. So that was the third step that I crawled. And then on the fourth step, it was about goal setting. I, in fact, already was very, very passionate about goal setting. I read all the best books on goal settings. I flew to Las Vegas to see Anthony Robbins. I saw Brian Tracy about goal setting, and I read all his books, and I applied it. but I applied it only in the workplace. So because I all my life had goals around work, and I studied the KPIs, I studied the targets, and I made sure I deliver or over deliver on them. But at home, I didn't have any goals. So therefore, my life was not balanced. It was like 90% work, 10% life, and I had to balance that out. So what I did then was work with coaches and mentors to look at the holistically, and we talk about the wheel of life in coaching, where we look at the 8 areas of our life, not only business and career, and not only life, but more also we look at our finances, we look at personal relationship, our marriage, we look at fun and recreation, and we look at physical environment and everything else in our life to really build that meaningful life. So today I have goals in all areas of my life, and I'm constantly reviewing them with my coach to make sure that I live a holistic life. I also do that for all my coaching clients, where we look at all the areas of their life and see how can we set meaningful goals that is then aligned with our life purpose and the legacy we want to achieve, so that that becomes the journey and the path that we're on. So that's been how I managed to turn this around over the last 6-7 years in all areas of my life. And then the last one is truly discipline. How do we get the accountability then to hold it all together, to make sure we stay on path? Because perhaps we can start a new habit and it works for a while, but then we fall back into old habits. And that's the step where we really need to be creative and also to be vulnerable and find accountability partners in all areas of our life. So every goal we set, it's about asking, okay, who can I keep me accountable on this? Is it my spouse? Is it my friend? If I want to cycle 3 times a week, do I need to join a cycling club? And what should I double down on to make sure that I deliver on this? So that's the 5 steps, and a very brief overview here to you today on this roadmap. So this is basically when I go out and I work with companies on this, I spend a full day or 2 days in a workshop where we do a workshop to go through and build this over all steps, so people leave it with an holistic path to a more balanced life. And that's really also how we can connect and own our emotional side of high performance. So what do I believe we can do if we do this, if we climb that ladder? Well, I believe we can turn back time. I'm soon 51 years of age, and I believe and feel like I'm much healthier today, more energized and more happier than I was when I was 18 or 20 years of age. I believe I'm a much better version of myself, and I believe that I've turned back time. I wanted to study psychology already when I was 23 years of age in Australia, but I was too scared. But now, age 50, I have just finished a degree in psychology. So I have looked back at my life and asked myself which were the decisions that I took based on someone else's advice, because I didn't have the confidence to stand up for myself, to make decisions for myself when I was younger. And studying a degree in psychology was one of them. So I just graduated now, so I'm therefore also a therapist and counselor, and so I can have these conversations with people to really align their life. Here's a friend of mine, another Swede, Jonas Bohr. He is 58 years of age, and he is on a mission to prove that you're never too old to grow young. He just actually broke the 200-kilometer cycle record, a speed record. You can look up Jonas Bohr online. He's a true inspiration, and I love to surround myself with these people who we all just believe that, you know, we can just keep having fun and energize ourselves, because the more we align with our purpose and the more we set holistic goals, the better our life becomes. My last slide for today is just a snapshot of what my life looked like today, and the life I have is truly beyond my wildest dreams. I could picture sports cars and nice houses and holidays also before, but I wasn't myself, and I could feel empty in a room with my family. I could feel empty and lonely around my friends. These days I found a real connection, so I can be present wherever I am. I'm calling into you today from the beauty of Phuket, Thailand, which is my back office. I live here in a triathlon Ironman camp where I'm surrounded by the best athletes in the world. So I've drawn out my life deliberately to live and be more holistic and healthy. So thank you very much for allowing me to share. Just a final note also for anyone who want to apply these concepts, USBI is offering this participant complimentary and assessment as well, and the USBI team will share some more details with you for how you can access it. So thank you everyone, and I believe that's me, so now open up for questions.
Nick, thank you so much. Thank you very much for delivering a session that goes far beyond inspiration. I think your story reflects all three: the spark of self-awareness, the shift from isolation to reconnection, and the success that comes from leading with humanity. Ladies and gentlemen, our deepest hope is that today did more than just inform you. I hope it softened something inside of you. I hope it reminded you to choose yourself, not just your output, to honor your well-being, not just your work, and to reconnect with others and with your own humanity. Nick, your framework, the 5 steps to holistic leadership, challenges us to rethink how we build high-performance cultures. It reminds us that excellence is not accidental. It is engineered through intentional habits, aligned values, and leaders who are willing to invest in their own well-being as seriously as they invest in results. We have a question from Ola. Ola says, a great roadmap. Thank you, Nick. When you plan goals, how quickly should they be achievable? Or should we set a selection for ourselves across different timing?
Yes, thank you, Ola, for the question. And I believe when it comes to goal setting, we can have short-term goals, medium terms, and long terms. And what I do when I start working with a coaching client, I basically ask everyone to scale also where they are currently in one area. And let's just mention health. Let's say physical health, for example, here. If someone say, well, I'm a bit overweight, I'm not really eating well, I'm not sleeping well, my health is a 3 out of a 10 at the moment. Then I would ask them, okay, where would you like to be? Well, I like to be an 8 out of 10 in health. And then it's about drawing that journey to go from a 3 to an 8 in your health. What steps would you need to take? What would that mean? Would that mean exercising a few times a week, eating better, and then making it a 4 out of a 10? That can be the short-term goal. Making it a 5 out of a 10 in health, that can be medium term, and then perhaps a 6 out of a 10 is then a bit longer term. So that's typically how I scale and set up goals in all areas of our life with the coaching clients I'm supporting.
Thank you so much, Nick. That's incredible. I think I do have a question. If anyone does have a question, please feel free to raise up your hand and unmute your microphone. But Nick, I've got a question for you. My question is this: for leaders who are operating at full speed, often masking their own struggles while carrying the weight of their teams, targets, and expectations, what is the very first non-negotiable shift they need to make to avoid crossing that line from high performance into silent suffering?
Yeah, high performance can be addictive like everything else, right? And it's about having that in balance and making sure we don't overdo it, which I did. I focused too much on high performance, and it's about balancing the life out. And what I found is once we find meaning and purpose in various areas of our lives, then it balances out. Because we have only so many hours in a day, and it's about shifting that focus by having those meaningful conversations. And especially when we talk about high performance, most of us are referring to our business and our career, and perhaps most of us will spend too much effort there. Just to give you an example, when I run my workshops or keynotes, I typically have a self-assessment where people will rank themselves. And what I can see is for executives in general, the biggest gap everyone has is in health. They rank themselves a 3 or 4 out of 10. While we look at business and career, the most executives say I'm a 7 out of 10 or I'm an 8 out of 10. So the story this tells us is that we actually sacrifice our health at the expense of having a successful career.
Thank you, Nick. That's so profound. We do have a question from Brian. Brian says, in your work on executive loneliness, what is one early warning sign leaders should never ignore in themselves, even when everything looks successful from the outside?
Yeah, that's a very, very tricky one. Just like me sitting there on the stool, I had that smile on my face, right? And what I found is that the more someone is in a depression, the more they will try to hide it and cover it up. And actually, no one found out during those 3 years that I went through a difficult time. Actually, my wife today, when I sat her down that day and I shared my story, she had no idea that I was going through depression. And that's me thinking that life is over. So that's me at the worst. She was by my side at the worst and she had no idea. So we are very good actors. So what can we do then? Well, here comes the thing, what I believe we need to do. We need to practice to be more vulnerable in all our conversations. We need to be more open with a few people we trust and share a little bit about ourselves, so then they can share back. So we build up these safe spaces in the good times, so when someone naturally fall in the bad times, because we all go through the roller coaster of life, then people naturally will speak up. The issue in my life was that I had not built any of those safe spaces. I wasn't open and honest with anyone in the good times, so when the tough time came, I didn't share it. Just one giveaway there. If you look at my picture or think about that picture again, the giveaway was one there. I had gained a lot of weight. So I had gained about 30 kilograms quite quickly. So we can look for those kind of patterns perhaps in people. We can also see if they lost a hobby, for example. If one of our friends who we've been going for a walk every weekend for 5 years suddenly stops, that could be a warning sign to look out for.
That is incredible. I think we are all great actors. Nick, thank you so much for that. Paul has a question. Paul, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. Yeah, Nick, great talk. So a lot of our customers will be on this call or they're watching the recording. And could you simplify it for them as to, you know, what problems do you solve? I mean, you've alluded to a number, but where's your greatest strength? So if they have a brief or if they have this particular situation, it's a no-brainer to call Nick. Like you know, 10 out of 10, you will move the needle and move the dial with that particular situation. So maybe you could help us simplify it a little bit.
Yeah, so as a keynote, what I just shared, you just had a snapshot of it now. If I have 40, 45 minutes, I will share more in detail on the 5 steps. So I think the vulnerability, the connection is good as a starter. If it's in a workshop then or a training over a day, then it works really well with a leadership team where they want to build a stronger connection. If there is a bit of tension in the leadership team, let's say between the younger generation, the older generation, there's friction, they're not really getting along, then that typically humanize it and connect the teams. Because I start with, typically, even in a workshop, I start with a keynote, what you saw a snapshot of today for about 1 hour. And more storytelling, more cases, not only my journey, but the journey of others as well. And then it's really up to them. So you can imagine after a coffee break, then when we go into surrender, I said, well, I had to surrender keeping things secret and silent. I also had to admit that I had an alcohol problem during that time. I was overeating. So I had to surrender those 3 things. Then it's over to the team. Okay, now think about what do you need to surrender. And if it is in a young group, they will look at themselves and say, hey, I'm spending too much time on my social media. When I should read a book at night, I'm actually on TikTok. I'm binge watching Netflix on the weekend instead of being out exercising. So it creates this good environment where the team will actually bond by sharing a little bit of the dark secrets, because we all have them, but I will humanize that in the workshops, and that's where you build really strong trust, Paul.
Great. So ideally, it's great if you can do a keynote and then have a little bit of extra time to workshop it a bit, with you know, to get that sort of impact, that interaction, that collaboration. Where you don't have time, in other words, where they just only have a slot for like a keynote presentation, what should be on that brief that is just like our customer managers, all of us, our customers would know that, yeah, and they can move the dial.
Yeah, so if it's a keynote, and I have 3 keynotes coming up in the next 2 weeks, it's typically 40 minutes to about 75 minutes. So obviously, more time I can hit more impact, and I would say again, it's that human connection, the trust. If you want to build psychological safety or high performance, then that can be a good kickoff. I mean, I'm quite vulnerable with my self-disclosure, and that is, I think people love storytelling. Today I shared a bit of my story, but I bring in people to life, both men and women executives who have managed to turn their life around, but also sadly some who haven't, and what is it we can learn from them. So I think any client who want to have an impactful kickoff, that can work for that as well.
Love it. Anecdotal. I can see how that could work brilliantly. Thank you, Nick. I know it's not always easy to answer that in a few seconds, but it's very helpful for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nick. So it's more than just a keynote, but it is an intervention where we get to share vulnerability, build trust, and honor our humanity. To everybody who joined us, thank you for engaging with a conversation that is becoming increasingly critical across all industries. The competitive advantage of the future will belong to organizations who understand this. Well-being is not a nice to have. It is a strategic lever for performance, innovation, and long-term leadership effectiveness. I am Melissa Tsodetse, and it has been a privilege to host this session of Spark, Shift, and Succeed. Thank you for your commitment to growing, evolving, and leading with intention, in this case, with humanity as well. Next week, we host Kobus Viasa, the human advantage in an AI world, right here on Spark, Shift, and Succeed at 9 a.m. on Monday, South African time. We will be in touch. Nick, thank you once again. Ladies and gentlemen, have a great week further. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.